Morning, nice to see you.
Yes, and you. Just hoping this morning that we're okay for technical elements. We've both been having a little bit of fun, so fingers crossed we'll be all right.
Touch wood, we'll be
Yeah.
fine.
If not, we're just going to carry on regardless and just be total pros about this if
Yes.
anything goes wrong. So, Olivia, your official job title then is an equine or an animal behaviour consultant. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
Cool.
correct.
And you work
And
with.
I'm also
Oh,
I work with dogs as well,
yes.
and I'm also an equine bitting specialist.
Perfect. So we're going to be chatting today then about lots of different things, but we're going to be looking at
Mm-hmm.
themes along the lines of building your horse's confidence. We are going to concentrate on horses this morning, but obviously lots of us have dogs as well, so there might be a little bit of dog in there every now and
Yep.
again. But yeah, how you can build your horse's confidence, because it's really important, isn't it? In order to be performing at your best, in order to be feeling good, most of us, well, I hope all of us really are doing this because we absolutely love horses. And even the professionals started because they absolutely loved horses. It might be that
Exactly.
things are a little bit more difficult now or anything like
Mm.
that, but essentially it's that drives us, isn't it? So how can we make our horse happy and confident and willing in our partnership?
Mm.
And understanding what it is that we want. We're going to look at things like comfort. So obviously, being a Loriner, that's the right term for it, isn't it? Bitting
Mm-hmm.
specialist,
Yep,
Loriner. Yeah,
definitely.
there we go.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking about comfort and things like that as well. And then maybe some common misunderstandings around training and some stuff like that. And anything anyone has any questions on in between. So, Olivia, just give us a little bit of background into you, how you got into what you're doing, and you tell us your story.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it all started when it was that time of choosing a degree, what you're going to go off and do as a career, and being an animal lover since I was tiny. That was obviously my pathway to do. So I actually started off doing animal behaviour and marine biology at university, and then realised that I didn't necessarily want to go out and measure plankton for the rest of my life. So I changed and then picked up the animal welfare side of things, which just opened this massive door to kind of pet behaviour counselling, domestic animal behaviour and welfare, and then realised that so many things that we're doing with animals, because they don't have a choice in a lot of things that we do, whether they're captive or domestic, and in our pets. And I just felt that there was a lot of unfairness in in those relationships. So being able to help people make their animals better, happier, and improve that whole round relationship was really important to me. So yeah, so I finished my degree. So my degree is in animal behaviour and animal welfare. And I focused my dissertation on horse training, specifically ethical horse training. So I actually looked at using positive reinforcement in horse training, and then did a little bit of research around that. And I was lucky enough to present my research as an oral presentation in Philadelphia at the International Society for Equitation Sciences conference that was out there. So that was a huge nerve-wracking moment for me, standing in this massive auditorium with all the world's top scientists with all their equine research. So that was an amazing experience, absolutely fantastic. And then I sort of had a bit of a gap where I was trying to figure out where to go next. And for me, I wanted to go and train at the Australian Equine Behaviour Centre, which is run by Dr. Andrew McLean and his family. So to study with them, learn more about ethical horse training and putting that learning theory into practice and getting a lot of experience in that field. So I ended up staying out there for 4 months doing their working pupil program. And that was it was amazing. It taught me so much. And then came back to the UK armed with all my new skills, and just gradually started building things up. So I think for me, predominantly, it was more horse-based to begin with, and definitely then picked up a lot of the dog stuff as well. And then I think in about, I'd only come out of uni for about a year, and then I was snapped up by this company called the Animal Osteopathy International, and they had a lot of courses based at the European School of Osteopathy. So they then asked me to lecture on their courses in animal behaviour, so dogs and horses, which I really enjoyed, and I've been lecturing with them for about 6 years now, which is fantastic. So I just pop on, meet all the students, teach them about dog and horse behaviour and body language so that they can treat them safely, and it's just been wonderful, really lovely. So I've done quite a few of those sort of lectures, and that's then opened me up into other academic areas where I've done a lot of talks and guest lecturing. So I think the most recent place that I've done that, especially for the equine stuff, is at the Open College of Equine Studies in Suffolk, which is good. So during lockdown, there's been quite a few webinars been going backwards and forwards. So that's been a huge learning curve for me to suddenly do it all online. I think with the dog side of stuff, I see a lot more private clients for that. So there's not as much lecturing in the dog world than in the horse world for me. But I've done quite a lot of courses on dog aggression. So I think with dog behaviour, I see a lot more of reactivity and aggression cases that are quite serious, or at a veterinary level. I help the vets with that. But I think everyone's mindset is shifting a lot about their horses, and a lot of the traditional views that are considered quite unethical sometimes are now being put to the side, which is really nice. So I'm having a lot more people actually approach me for equine behaviour situations and cases, which is great. And I've actually got a sleep deprivation case coming up this weekend, which will be very, very interesting to have a look at that one. So yeah, it's all building up. It's great. And actually, I think lockdown has been one of the busiest times for me, because so many people are spending time at home with their pets and riding their horses. And actually, I do want to work on this, or this needs a bit of extra tweaking. So lots of bitting clients coming out as well, which has been great.
That's fantastic. So you're a busy lady, obviously got lots of ground in research and things like that.
I've been very busy.
Yeah. And the cool part about researching this stuff is that you really can research this stuff, can't you? You really can see the effect of things. You can do it in a way that you can tell the difference. It's really nice.
Yeah.
So tell us more about the idea of ethical training of horses then, and some of the things that are coming to the forefront now as perhaps not being seen as ethical. Because the thing with our horse world is it's been around for a very long time, hasn't it? And it started off in the military, or it started off, in that sort of side of things. And some of that stuff's still around, but actually probably wasn't the most effective, but it was just the way it was done at the time. And things have very much changed over the years, haven't they? So tell us a little bit more about that then.
Hugely. And I think when we talk about something being ethical, it means that there is your personal opinion on what is ethical, what's unethical. And then a lot of those ethics are deemed suitable by society. So those guidelines that society set up. So the ethics is now embedded in our law and in the Animal Welfare Act, which states that an animal must be free from fear, pain, discomfort. It has to have the freedom to express its normal behaviours. And actually, when we look at that closely and we nitpick on that, and then we look at what a lot of horses are exposed to, so horses that are kept in stables for the majority of the day and hardly get any turnout, or they get restricted access to forage, then you could argue that in those situations, even though it's considered perfectly normal and acceptable, actually the welfare for that horse could be considered quite poor, and then therefore the treatment is quite unethical. So I think there is a huge grey area, well, not necessarily a grey area, but there's a lot of tradition, and then we've got the science that's now coming in saying a horse is stressed in this is causing them discomfort, this causes them fear and pain. So it's getting there, and I think over the past 15 years they are starting to mesh together. And I think the biggest, well, not outcry, but the biggest bit of research that came about was quite a few years ago now, but they basically proved that horses that were stabled were actually quite stressed. And that was a big turning point for a lot of people. But then I think it can take owners, especially the ones, I've been doing this for 40 years and I'm really experienced and I know what I'm doing, absolutely fine. But trying to change that mindset and accept a new way of thinking or a new way of doing something can be very, very difficult for them. So bombarding them with lots of stuff that just tells them that all you're doing is wrong is just not very helpful. So when it comes to talking about ethical training, obviously that is all about making it clear for the animal. They have to understand what you're asking. Are you applying too much pressure? And do they understand that? Have you actually taught them what pressure or release means? So negative reinforcement, do they understand what that means? And ultimately, if you're an ethical trainer, then you are doing things for the welfare of the horse. So that horse's mental state is the most important thing for you. So I've seen trainers who claim that they are doing that, and yet I'm watching them stress a horse out, put it into a flight response, and it's just running around scared for 10 minutes. And eventually, yes, you get what you want, but for that horse, it was not an enjoyable, positive experience. So the memories that they're making of that and associating that with a person on the end of a long rope flicking it around isn't necessarily going to help them. And I think it's when people say ethical training, I think a lot of people go on the whole, it has to be positive reinforcement bandwagon, which is fine. And yes, that's the nicest way of training an animal. But it doesn't have to be always positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is fine if you're using it correctly.
So just for the people that don't know what this language that is that you're using of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, adding things, taking things away, all that kind of stuff, tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so this is what the science has kind of given to us, and we call it learning theory. So it basically describes how animals learn and take in new information. And it's exactly the same for us. We learn in exactly the same way. A fish will learn in exactly the same way. You can apply this to all kind of living organisms that can learn new things. So this is, and the science was done, the research was done on this to prove this is the best way to train an animal, that's the most ethical and the best for their welfare. So there are, if we consider operant conditioning now, which is where an animal will make a choice about something and it performs a behaviour to get something else. And there are considered 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, and 2 of these quadrants will increase the performance of a behaviour, and 2 of these quadrants will decrease the performance of a behaviour. So we've got reinforcement at the top to increase the performance of a behaviour, and we've got punishment at the bottom to decrease the performance of a behaviour. And there are 2 types of reinforcement. We've got positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And positive reinforcement just means giving something to the animal in order to increase the performance of a behaviour. So the horse stops and you give it a treat, that's that sort of situation. Negative reinforcement means you take something away to increase the performance of a behaviour. And this is, I think the wording of this is a bit confusing for a lot of people because it's the word negative and you think it's really bad. And the actual definition of this is the removal of an aversive stimulus to the horse. And aversive doesn't mean it has to be painful or horrible or nasty. It just has to be something that the horse wants to get rid of. So for example, your leg pressure, rein pressure, if you're using a whip, you're tapping it, so that's pressure, that's still something it wants to avoid. Even if you're waving a whip behind them, it's still something they want to avoid. So it's not a rewarding, positive stimulus, but it's not something that should hurt the animal or should scare the animal. So negative reinforcement, when you're riding your horse and you apply a backwards rein pressure to ask it to stop, the second that the horse stops, that's when you release that pressure. And it's the removal of the pressure or the aversive stimulus that teaches the horse what you want and is therefore increasing the performance of that behaviour in the future. So we've got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, all great. You can use them, it's not a problem. And I think people get very confused about the whole pressure and release situation with negative reinforcement because they just think it's either too nasty, or I've seen people say they're using it and actually you're stressing the horse out or you're causing it a lot of pain by hitting it too hard with the stick. And then we've got into the punishment side of things. So we've either got positive punishment or negative punishment. Again, positive just means to add something. So positive punishment means you hit the horse for not doing what you want, and that will decrease the performance of a behaviour. So for example, if the horse bit you and you whacked it in the face straight away, you would be positively punishing it for biting you. Then you've got negative punishment. So negative means to take something away. So you might remove your attention from the horse to decrease the performance of the behaviour. And I think the most sort of common example of this is the horse that's banging on the stable door to ask for its dinner. And if you remove yourself from the situation, or you remove the bowl, you take yourself away, you've then negatively punished the horse for performing the banging on the door behaviour. So in the whole sort of concept of ethical training, is that trainer understands these quadrants of learning theory, because if you don't understand how the horse is learning, then you're not formulating your training in a way that that animal can understand, and you are missing quite a lot of the subtle indicators that that horse can give you, that actually they don't understand, they're quite stressed or they're frightened, or they're becoming over aroused and frustrated in some of those situations. So yeah, it's
wow, it's really good, and it took me a long time to get my head around these, because it can get quite confusing.
Quite wordy, aren't they?
What's a positive punishment, like
Yeah.
So yeah, but okay, so that's great, and that gets people thinking that actually there are 4 ways to do things. There are ways that are preferred, that are more helpful, and there are ways that aren't preferred but will still work, but might have a negative long-term effect. Okay, cool. So if we are looking at a common one, so let's look at a common one. So let's look at, so the top 2 are quite obvious, aren't they? You either say, thank you very much, that's what I wanted, I'm going to give you something, or you put something on, like a pressure of some sort, and when they give you what you want, you take it away. So that they're quite like common to think of. But maybe let's have a look at the punish area, the bottom quadrant, where they're smacked for not doing the behaviour. So we see this. There was a controversy, wasn't there, with I think it was Ollie Townend, wasn't it, who was hitting the horse too much after it refused defence. So that would be an example, wouldn't it, of punishing it for not doing what we want. Now, why is that confusing for a horse? Because the pony club traditionally, and okay, there are people in the pony club don't do this, so we have to be really careful about this stuff and generalising. But often it's, if a pony refuses a jump, you smack it, for instance. Why is that not helpful for a horse if you want to build a confident partnership?
So when we're talking about punishment or even reinforcement, your timing has to be spot on. And if you're delayed by more than a couple of seconds, then the horse will not associate the punisher or the reward with the behaviour that it's just done. So, for example, if we think about the whole, okay, the horse is going to refuse a jump, for the horse to really understand that refusing the jump was what wasn't wanted, your timing has to be literally the second that that horse starts to slow down or try and back off from the jump. Then that's when if you were to use a whip and smack them, then that would be an appropriate-ish use for that. But by the time the horse has dumped you on the floor and you've got back on, and then you give it 4 whacks, you're basically punishing the horse for standing still and letting you get on. So whatever you're doing, whenever that's occurring, what is the horse doing on the second that you've given them that? And then deem whether it's appropriate or not. And I think using a whip in sort of jumping aspects, again, it depends on what does the horse think the whip is. Like, what is the cue? What behaviour are you asking for from using the whip? And so have you actually trained your horse, when I do hit you with the whip, it means go faster, or does it mean have a longer stride, or is it literally just to cause you pain? And then when you cause a horse pain, they're not going to stand there and think logically about, oh no, what did I do wrong? I must do something else. You then spark off a lot of stress and fear about the situation. So you've potentially then putting the horse into a flight response and running away from you. So for a rider, oh yes, now my horse is going faster and it's fine, but your horse is now in a stress response. So they're not necessarily capable of a lot of more logical thinking, so to speak, about what's going on. They don't necessarily think, well, I refuse that jump and that's why they hit me, so I won't refuse to jump again. And when a horse is doing those unwanted behaviours, it's really important, well, why did it do it in the first place? So a lot of the time, oh, actually they're in pain and jumping hurts, or they're actually getting quite tired and they're struggling, or it could be like physical pain from an internal sort of problem, or it could be the saddle's wrong, or anything like that could cause it pain and not want it to jump, or it found that the jump was scary and suddenly got close up to it where they can now actually see it properly in their field of vision, and have then had a bit of a fright and gone, oh gosh, no thanks, and they put the brakes on. So I think, like, when we're watching top eventers and stuff, I think they're very skilled riders and they know what they're doing and they know their horse. So yes, you could argue that there are moments when applying the whip is appropriate, and especially if you're going quite fast into a massive cross-country fence, it's dangerous to stop or slow down and get off of your your speed and your line. So encouraging the horse to, no, we need to keep going, otherwise we're going to have an accident. I would deem that as suitable in the moment. It's not necessarily the most ethical, but you've got other things at play. And that horse wouldn't be there at that level if it couldn't do that, if it couldn't compete at that level. I think hitting the horse afterwards is where, and especially with that example on the eventing course, I think his horse was getting quite tired. So for him, he was trying to, okay, let's get a bit more oomph from you, which again is fine, but the horse was physically struggling. And I think that's where that ethical debate came in to that. So, and it's exactly the same in horse racing when you talk about whips in horse racing. If the jockeys actually trained their horses to lengthen their stride on the use of a whip, then actually maybe that would be a slightly different take on that. But it's just the complete, whack it, whack it, whack it. I know they're not doing that all the time, because when you watch them, some of them are just waving it, or they tap their leg, or it's not actually hitting the horse every time. But it's still, when you watch him, well, the horse isn't actually getting any faster. The horse isn't lengthening its stride. So what are you actually achieving with that, and how does the horse feel about what's going on? And then just to touch on the consequences of using punishment, and I think negative punishment is more ethical, so to speak, than positive punishment, because you're just taking something away. So taking your attention away from a horse that's banging on the door isn't hurting it, but you have to understand that horse is now going to get very frustrated. So again, it might take longer for the horse to learn that banging on the door means my dinner walks further away from me. And actually using a more reinforcement-based approach in that situation would probably work a bit quicker and would have longer lasting effects than the negative punishment. And then with positive punishment, obviously that's the huge kind of no-no on ethical training. But it does depend on what's happened to the horse before and what the horse has already learned. And I think if you've got a massive 18-hand horse and it's coming towards you and it's going to do something absolutely horrendous because that's what it's learned to do and it's running frightened, then instead of staying in that moment and thinking, well, I'll just beat the horse until it stops, let's go backwards and see what's actually happening earlier on for this horse in its interaction with a person and work there. So I do think in some moments when people are punishing a horse, they've hit it, then if their timing is right, then yes, technically you're using positive punishment correctly. But it's when people use it as an ongoing process, rather than looking at why the horse is doing it to begin with. Let's fix the root cause rather than this behavior that we're getting as an outcome of its stress or its fear. And if you're using punishment a lot, then the horse, every time it's interacting with a person, it's just associating you with things that are scary, things that are frightening, things that hurt. So its whole attitude about wanting to work and being sort of a willing partner, if you like, in that concept, in that training element, isn't going to be very, very nice for the horse. So yes, punishment works. That's why it exists. Punishment works on us. But then we can think about things in a very different way to animals. We've got those high level of cognitive abilities, whereas horses just don't. So that's where I see a lot of trainers who don't understand kind of the behavioural science side of things, and they don't read body language correctly, and they're waiting for a horse to do something that it's never going to be able to do because it doesn't have the abilities to understand those elements of human behaviour that we anthropomorphise and put that onto a horse. So you've just got this stressed horse running round and round that eventually just gives up and goes, oh, well, if I stand still, actually now you've left me alone, so I'll just do that. Or you've actually flooded the horse with a lot of scary things that it can't get away from. So then you run into the realms of learned helplessness, where the horse has learned nothing I do is going to work. So I'll just stand here and allow you to put all these things on me. On the surface, it looks like that was the best training in the world, but actually internally, and again, you can see it in the facial expression, it might only be very, very slight, but that horse is actually very stressed and it could be very frightened. So they work, but not necessarily for the right reasons that the trainer is aiming for.
Okay, amazing. That covered so many things. I've got a million questions now. Okay, but so when we look at any behaviour, then what I'm hearing is we need to look at the context. So that's the most important thing. Why is the behaviour occurring is going to be the most important question there. What does that horse know or not know? What has it learned before? Does it actually understand what you're asking of it or don't want it to do? is your timing right on whether you're telling it is right or wrong in that moment?
Yes.
Yeah. What else might be getting in the way of it? Is it actually able to learn in that moment, or is it in fear response? And all this stuff is just the same as human behavior. Well, it is, because we're animals, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same. So if we look into some things that, like, my clients, and in fact, a really great question, I think it's just come in for this, which probably is a really good one. Yeah, okay. So something that I work on a lot with my clients, and at the same time, I just want to quickly talk about trauma here, which is when we talked about learned helplessness and we talked about flooding, that's a response to trauma in animals, isn't it? That's a response to, I can't do anything about this, so I'm going to freeze or shut down. And that same response happens in humans, and I'm working with this all the time with humans. Now we can go in and rewire the neurological link to trauma. I'm sure there's going to be a way one day. I want to find a way of doing this with animals, because it works so incredibly well in humans. But how do we get an animal to, like, change the video in its head or whatever? I don't know. But there must be a way. So I work a lot with riders, helping them to understand the responses of their horses, not because that's what I do, but because sometimes when you can understand why a horse is behaving a certain way, you can then help the horse, which de-escalates the situation, can't you?
Massively,
but we've got to get the human into logical thinking and the horse able to deal with it. So one question that's come through recently, because this is what I work with a lot, is spooking or napping. Okay, so why do some horses spook or nap in the same place when they passed it again and again and again, and what can we do to reinforce it? And also with that, if we're thinking about human mindset and human confidence, often the horse might have, like you say, the scary jump, it might have approached you and gone, oh, I don't think I'm sure of that. And I'm always talking about the red filler. I mean, that's the thing I always talk about. So a horse sees a jump one day, it happens to have a red filler in it. And it goes, whoa, I'm not sure about that, or it doesn't quite get its stride right, or something happens, so it doesn't jump it, or it stops, whatever. Right? But then the rider will take it from, perhaps I did something wrong, or the horse wasn't able to deal with it, or something was going on. And they'll do what we call generalize, and this happens in behavior as well, doesn't it? Generalization. To the point where suddenly the horse doesn't like red jumps, or the horse doesn't like fillers, and it becomes this big thing. So then what happens is the rider is expecting it to happen, so they'll behave differently, which is then teaching the horse that when you see something that looks a bit like that, you stop. So then the horse has a problem. So tell us a little bit about that side of things, because it just fascinates me from both areas.
So I think I'm already thinking of a really interesting example that I had a long time ago, and it was a show jumper, and this horse was absolutely fine. There were no problems with it, and it was a really talented jumper. And it got to the point where on I think it was either the 5th or 6th fence round the course, and they were all different courses, different venues, different locations, would do a stop at the 6th fence. And for that horse, it could have just well started off as something, lost it, an odd stride, an out stride. The fence was a bit spooky. For some reason, it stopped, and they had to go and again do it again. And this then, for the rider, because the horse would have forgotten about that, it doesn't exist anymore. The rider, the next time came round, because it was so out of character for this horse, oh, we've got to the 6th fence, I hope it's not going to happen again. Horse stopped again. And I think this happened maybe at 5 different course, events. And they were like, we just don't understand, and like, this horse is fine, being checked, blah, blah. And I got the rider to count the fences differently, or count them back to front, have a different number, jump number 4 3 times, and then it was fine, because I think a lot of it was from how the rider was feeling at the time, and tensed up slightly because, oh god, it's gonna refuse the 6th fence, here we go. And then there's a huge pressure, especially in a competition environment, because you've paid your entrance fee. The horse normally does really well, and actually sometimes you come home with a bit of money. So it all piles on. So you've got the rider being a stressed ball of tension, and the horse can pick up on that so quickly. And I think this is the thing with horses, they don't communicate noises to other horses a lot of it is these very, very subtle body language indicators. So it's just the flick of one ear, or it's the blink of an eye, or it's just the lick of a lip, or the swish of a tail, so it's so tiny, and they're very acutely aware of what others are doing around them, because that's what's so important to them. That is how they on an evolutionary term, that's how they've developed as really social animals, and that's how they survive. And if they shouted at each other the whole time, oh, there's a scary bush over there, or potentially there's a rabid dog that's going to eat us, well, they're all just going to get preyed upon the whole time because they're making too much noise. So it's all about being quiet. And so that's why I think they're so aware of what we're like and how we're feeling. I really keep meaning to find the reference for this, but horses can actually hear your heartbeat from about 3 feet away. So if your heartbeat is racing, and obviously during their whole life period, they would have associated a racing heartbeat from a person with that person then acting quite scared or reactively, or that means the person is going to hit me all of a sudden, or depends how that person reacts. So if the rider is tensing up, and even just like the chemicals that are released in your body from stress, the horse is going to pick up on those as well, just like dogs do. They can smell that on us. And horses can also, not that they would necessarily see this when you're riding, but especially when you're handling a horse, they understand they can read your body language and your facial expressions, and they remember that. So they can actually pick out, or they will respond differently to an angry face compared to a happy face. And they remember the people that, that person gave me a really nice treat the other day, and this person just hits me all the time, or this person shouts at me all the time. So they change their behavior, and they remember these people and your face. They remember your face and what you look like and who you are. And I think a lot of people maybe just don't realize, or kind of forget that, because in one breath you expect your horse to be as intelligent as a person, and then in another breath you're treating it like, a simple animal. But yeah, so basically they make memories in exactly the same way that we do, but their capacity for the amount of information they can take in at any one time is going to be a lot less than what we can take in at any one time. And they're very context specific learners, so we can generalize things much quicker than they can, and horses take a lot longer. They have to have a lot of repetitions of something in different environments, in different contexts, to then understand that the red filler is absolutely fine, we don't need to worry about it. And interestingly, horses can't see red, it comes up as grey. So the red jumps always look a bit weird because it's kind of almost doesn't exist, or it's camouflaged with the arena, or there's a massive shadow, and so it's normal for a horse to be a bit spookier, so to speak, that on a red fence. So if we think about spooking, and say your horse spooks at, like, say, exactly the same point every ride, and you're fine and you've done all your meditation and your breathing, and we're going to go through this, but the horse has made a very context specific memory of that point. So say it was the pigeon that burst out of the hedge. The second time, because it was such a shock learning event for that horse, and they're flight animals, they're prey animals, so anything that scares them or is potentially dangerous, that's very important for them to make a memory about that to help keep themselves safe in the future. And this is how they will make those long-lasting memories very quickly in their brain, and they process information that comes in as dangerous and scary quicker because of the pathway it takes through the brain. So you can either kind of take a very shortcut pathway through, it goes straight into the limbic system, and then you've kind of made a memory about it without even really thinking like logically about that piece of information, or you can take information in calmly and it goes to kind of the cortex side of the brain to then think about it more and analyze it a bit more and think about how you will respond to that piece of information. So the pigeon bursting out of the hedge, that's suddenly, it's very rapid, it's very scary, it's made a weird noise, so that goes straight into the danger zone of the brain and makes a very quick memory about it. And the horse has reacted without being necessarily consciously aware of what it's doing. So that's why you have the horse that ran into a fence or did something really stupid, and actually it's because they weren't thinking about what's going on. So the next time you come to that hedge, the horse is already thinking, oh, now hang on, because now you've triggered off the memories. This is now the environment, the context that we were in last time, and those memories trigger how they felt the last time. So I was scared here last time, and I had a massive stress response, and we danced about for 5 minutes before my rider could calm me down, and then we carried on. And so having that and coming back into that area means you're almost definitely going to have the same reaction the last time. So it's about understanding that your horse isn't, there's always a reason for behavior. Your horse won't just suddenly decide to do something silly for the fun of it, because they can't do that.
And my favourite phrase, people go, oh, they're just being an arse. No, sorry, no. They're never just being an arse. No. They've learnt it for some reason.
Definitely. They can't, and they can't be naughty. I get that one a lot. Oh, she's really naughty today, or she's in a mood today. Yeah, they're not humans. They don't have the cognitive ability to be naughty. And I think to be naughty means that they have to understand how you think and feel about the thing that they're being naughty about. So technically, they then have to have theory of mind, which is a whole other Q&A. Yeah, so for them to understand that, they'd have to have the cognitive abilities of us, which they don't have. So they cannot think, if I do this, it's going to piss you off, and why would they want to do that if they get punished for it anyway? So it doesn't make sense. So no, they're reacting out of strong emotions in the moment, and then I think if that's repeated quite a few times, so the first few times the horse spooks at the hedge because the pigeon flew out the first time, it's still genuinely responding to fear-based emotions at that time in that specific context. But after a while, it will become a learnt response to being in that situation, because as far as they're concerned, well, this keeps me safe every time and the pigeon doesn't fly out, so I've got to dance around so the pigeon doesn't fly out. So then you get this kind of habit, if you like, of being in this particular place, and then that's why you're finding, well, what the hell am I going to do about this, because there's no pigeon. And you could say, okay, well, let's have loads of fake pigeons and we'll just shoot them out of fences every now and again, but it's in completely different situations, completely different contexts as well. So you can desensitize a horse to pigeons jumping out of hedges, but you might not. So they might be able to cope better in that situation where they had the pigeon jump out the fence the first time, but you've still got to help them cope with being startled and then coming back down from that. So that's where, like, the desensitization work can come in handy, because you're teaching the horse how to cope with sudden things that are happening, and basically we're helping you have less of a flight response each time. And some of that is to do, okay, well, that's the quicker we can stop you from rushing forwards or spinning or turning, then we're not allowing you to fulfill that flight response. So we're not allowing you to escalate in that fear emotion, so to speak. But we have to be careful that we don't put too much pressure on that then stresses the animal out even more. Otherwise, you're not having a positive experience about it. So this is where having your basic responses in hand and under saddle down to a T is really helpful. Otherwise, if you don't have a horse that responds to your stop aid or your go aid or your turn, then in a stressful situation, you've got no chance that horse is actually going to listen to you. So it's working with sort of spooky issues like that, and it's understanding that, is it a strong fear-based emotion now, or is it now a learnt behaviour? And going back to that place and actually helping them relax in that area. So I'll say to people, okay, well, if you're riding, then just stand still and let them eat the hedge for a while, have a bit of a graze, just stand still and genuinely relax. And if they can't do that on a hack anyway, then, well, maybe we need to readdress the whole actually leaving the yard and relaxing. And I think, yeah.
I was just going to add to that, the really common one that you must hear all the time as well is about, oh, we go out hacking and my horse spooks and it scares me. So what we've got in this situation, and this is why very often I will refer owners to someone like yourself to help the horse, because we've got this partnership here. And you can't rely on your horse to be confident for you if it's not confident in that situation. No. So what often happens when we're on a hack, let's talk about the pigeon in the hedge from a human perspective, how this creates a perfect storm, is that the pigeon jumps out, the horse spooks. But because the human has had a traumatic experience, it does whatever you call trauma, but an experience they would rather not repeat because of their horse behaving in whatever way it did. So that could be fight, flight, fidget, or freeze, any of those kind of things. Generally, we don't mind freeze, but we know normally that's a moment before it will then do one of the others, isn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, so because that's happened, they then go into their limbic response. They go into their fear response. So then we've got a horse and a human in non-logical fear response, haven't we? And often what happens is the human says, well, once my horse has calmed down, I'll be okay. And the bit that I work on is go, well, you can't expect that unless you're going to go and do that. So that's a good bit to go. We've got to get you to calm down. So I work in exactly the same way with the human, so that we can get the human response not being, because if we think about it, your horse has a negative reaction, a reaction we'd rather not have to a stimulus. and then you go rah, 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 at it because you get angry and scared, and you why are you doing that? And you tighten up the reins and you roll it in the gob and you beat it and you do whatever, you smack it, you get annoyed, and then the horse goes, God, that thing flies out the hedge, and then you respond like that. It must be terrible. I'm getting out of there before you can go near the hedge. And then we start getting napping problems and issues because it goes, I don't even want to go near that thing. So it's the same for horse and human, isn't it? Like we've got to get both of them able to respond appropriately. So let's think about something like napping. How would napping come about then?
So napping mainly is actually anxiety at leaving their place of safety. So for some horses, this is leaving the yard and leaving their friends behind, because again, it's not really normal or natural for a horse to go out by itself and be by itself. And especially if this is a horse, so I commonly see nappy issues in horses that don't have a lot of access to other horses on that social level. So they might be able to see horses from their stable door, but they never really get to touch them. They never get to graze with them. They're in a field by themselves. And that's, for social animals, that's a huge impact on their quality of life. And it does affect them on a mental level, because actually horses are driven to seek that social interaction with other horses, and if we're denying them that, then they're going to be stressed at some level, even if they appear absolutely fine. And I think this is where it depends on the history of the horse, because obviously you do have some horses that have never been socialized, so putting them with other horses actually stresses them out much more. And ex-race horses are typical ones of that. You put them in a field with other horses and they just go insane, or they do death laps around the field, or they're too almost pro-social and get themselves beaten up by everyone else because they're the irritating horse that's just appeared and wants to be friends with everyone, but has no boundaries of social interaction or communication at all. So the kind of that anxiety of leaving others will differ depending on what the horse experiences or doesn't experience, and what their social relationships are like on the yard. So we've got that anxiety of that. So that horse probably will start napping the second that you're even getting on, and it knows, oh, we're not heading to the arena, we're heading out. And even that can be a delayed reaction to your go aid. They might do a bit of a zigzag, so they're not actually maintaining a consistent rhythm or speed, and they're not maintaining straightness that you've put them on, and they might be constantly turning around to look, and you're just, I'll just get on with it. So you've kind of missed a lot of these early signals that the horse isn't happy, and then you get half an hour out, and now it's really having a meltdown because it just can't cope because we've gone too far now, or it's trigger stacked in its stress. So we've got minor stress response at leaving the yard, then the pigeon flew out, then the car went past, then something happened. And for a horse that's already anxious about being on its own and it's not confident, then having things happen, even if you feel like that the car went past and it didn't do anything, the horse might still have had a little stress response to that. You don't know, unless you had heart rate monitor on and a cortisol saliva sample going on all the time, or blood sample test going on. You're just not going to know. You're not going to get enough accurate feedback to know. And horses can be very clever at hiding those responses if you've always been punishing those. So if the car goes past and you whack it to get it back onto the edge of the road because it's suddenly swerved its bum out or something, then yes, you've got the desired behaviour that you wanted, i.e. the horse has gone back over, but because you used punishment in that moment, you haven't helped the horse feel better or more confident about the car going past. So you've not taught it anything nice. You've not said, this is how I want you to behave when cars go past. You've just said, don't do this. And that's all the guidance that you've given it. So if all of those things are happening, then you've got a very trigger stacked horse that's napping and now has an explosive moment out in the middle of the field because now, well, there's way too much space, and now I'm freaking out and I can't cope. So for napping, it's not something that you fix out on your ride, it's something that you fix on the yard and actually being able to get on and go up the driveway. And for some horses, it's for like a week, they're just going up to the driveway by themselves and coming back down, and actually the whole way is nice experiences, is nice things to do. And in really severe cases, well, let's take you out with a friend for a while to get you out, get you feeling a bit better, and then we gradually take the friend away, so you get more of a distance in between you and the friend. And then sometimes, you go out by yourself, but we only go a little way and then we come back again. So you're just breaking it down into manageable steps for the horse. And I think, again, this is something that a lot of people don't consider, because like, no, just get on with it, just march out, you'll be absolutely fine. And I think if you've got a confident rider on that can just ride them through those situations, then yes, you don't have this huge meltdown. But you have to ask yourself, what has the horse really taken away from that? And actually, were they just bubbling away with all this anxiety and stress, but they just haven't reacted to that because they know that you're just going to either punish it or you're just going to ride it forwards anyway. So it's not, you're not necessarily beating it up, but you've just given it no other choice other than just to keep going. So yes, the horse is hacked out, but it's not necessarily in the most helpful set it up for success sort of situation for that individual. And I see this a lot with owners that have got a spooky difficult horse and they sit to a trainer and the trainer gets on absolutely fine, but unless you work with the rider as well to help them feel confident. And I think, just like you say, understanding why the behavior is happening in the first place and being able to read your horse correctly is huge for my clients, at actually feeling happier working with their horse. And they know, oh, there's a bag in that hedge over there, or I know that the dog comes up to this fence, so let's just slow it down, let's break it down, let's take it easy, let's wait here, wait for the dog to come up first, and then you can go past the dog, because now you haven't just shoved your horse in this situation where all of a sudden something comes up in its face. And then the rider feels much happier. And I think for some people this is how everyone else does it, so therefore I have to be the same. And actually accept your own limitations and accept where you're at in your abilities and work with that with yourself. Because you're right, if you get stressed, and I think it's difficult, especially when you've had a horse that's done something really, really awful and you have had a traumatic experience with that horse, you can't help but go into survival mode whenever the horse changes. So if the horse dumps its shoulder and spooks one way, you're instantly going to hold on with the reins, and you've lost your seat now, you've lost all your balance, and you're just hanging on before you can kind of compose yourself and get back down. But in that moment, like you say, you've just stopped it in the mouth, you've kicked it, you've shouted at it, you've whacked it. So the horse has gone from having a minor, even it might not have even been stressed in that moment, it's just that visual stimulus of something that's made it go, oh, I don't know what that was. And most of the time, if you sort of sat there with a long rein and was like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine, okay, off we go, then there hasn't been a negative consequence for the horse. There's been zero consequence, but now a nice positive one when it's, oh yeah, okay, I can calm down now, well done, we'll have a nice with a scratch and off we go. Have some cow party on the way around, have a nice treat. And that is a much more helpful way. And I think actually saying to some owners, it's okay to go slower, or it's okay to stop and stand still. And I know that's not always ideal for some horses, because making the stop can actually make them a bit more anxious, and sometimes keeping them moving is more appropriate. So this is where it's not a one rule fits all situation. It's what are the capabilities of the rider, what can the horse actually manage.
And I think this is where a lot of people say to me, oh, well, would it be helpful if someone else hacked them out, for instance? And it's like, well, yes, if we look at it in the, you've both got a response that's not ideal at the moment.
Yeah.
If someone confident starts to hack them out, helps them become confident, does the right stuff with the horse, so the horse then starts to realize, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to always get a fear response when something happens. The person riding me isn't always going to be socking me in the mouth or getting unbalanced or shouting at me. So they can learn that then it's okay. Whilst I'm working with the rider to unwire their stuff, when we put the two back together, we've broken two patterns there. Because this is the other thing, isn't it? That in behavior, there is always patterns, patterns. There's always a trigger, there's an action, there's a target to the pattern, and then an exit afterwards. And when we get in other people or other animals' patterns, we'll always operate off of that pattern. So the trigger happens and both of us have a response. Which creates something, and then we get into this cycle. And we need to break that. And sometimes someone like yourself can help us break it in the animal, and sometimes someone like myself needs to help break it in the human. But actually, if we can break it in both places, then that's really effective, because we're not getting the stimulus. Well, we get the stimulus, but we're not getting the response to the trigger from either side anymore. Exactly. So we're all good. Which brings me on to just a little bit, if we can cover in the last few minutes of this. You're talking a lot about returning to competition, because a lot of people obviously now are. There's been a break from the environment of competition and all of the things that brings. And a lot of people might have been doing stuff at home that they think, oh, this is going to help us at competition, that may find that actually when they go to competition, it hasn't made any difference because of the environmental element. So how do we start from an animal perspective? I've been talking about it a lot from a human perspective of treating some shows as training and all sorts of things, taking the pressure off that. How do we do that for a horse that we might have de-spooked them at home, we might have got them used to umbrellas at home, tannoys, rings, other horses, or we might not have at all. We might have been in a lovely little one person in the school bubble for the last few months or whatever, or just hacked or whatever we do. How do we help a horse now get back into competition of elements, which has got so many things to it, hasn't it?
Yeah. And I think we have to look at what the horse is already okay with. So if you've got a horse that's seasoned in competitions and actually doesn't batter an eyelid at being there, then they're not going to have forgotten all of that the next time you go out. You know, they do remember things quite well. And I think when I've been to competitions and I've seen other riders and other horses that are there, and you've got the horse that can't stand still outside the lorry, you've got the horse beating the lorry up when it's standing, you know, because it can't cope with standing still on the lorry. And then you've got the horses that don't cope in the warm-up area. I mean, that's fine because it is quite stressful for a horse. You've got horses coming at you in all directions, and some riders are just awful in their etiquette in that area. And I'm watching my poor client, like their horse has got an issue with other horses coming too close, and we're just like, back off, leave us alone, leave us alone. So that's stressful for the person, let alone the horse. And we need to identify, okay, well, what is it about the competition that your horse has a response to, rather than my horse isn't good at competitions. That doesn't exist. There will be something. So exactly, there is a trigger for those behaviours, and there might be multiple triggers, or there might be just one. And for some horses, you know, typical dressage runs, oh, it's the flowers in the or sort of decoration around the arena is a huge thing for this horse. So in that situation, okay, well, let's go to somewhere. Let's hire out the venue. Take your trainer with you, or even have a few friends to make it cheaper. Go together and just practice being in the arena, practice your dressage test, just do silly things, but actually make it an enjoyable experience for your horse. Because practicing flowers at home is all very well, but again, they're context specific. So you can't take it, will not. Learning flowers at home is fine, but learning flowers in an arena where they now can't go up and touch them, or they can't, you know, it's a completely different environment, because then there's all this other stuff that's now combined with flowers in a dressage arena, in a competition environment. And I think they do have, the horses will have a tougher time if you've got a stressed out person that's worrying about that. And again, we've got the pressure of, I've paid a lot of money to be here, I've just travelled an hour, it was difficult to get on the lorry. All of these things just add on to it. And sometimes I've said to people, okay, you know what, I know that you're capable of going to a competition and you don't care. You know, you're not worried about your horse's behaviour, but your horse isn't coping. So actually, you need to go to a competition. Don't pay an entry fee. Just turn up in the car park because you can. Turn up in the car park, have a walk round, go home. Take it for a little hack round the, you know, location. Fine. Go and walk into the warm-up arena, because I don't think anyone really checks. So go there, have a ride round, and then come home.
You'd see my face then, only because an event organiser would be like, no, you can't do that. I mean, obviously at the moment we're going to have to be a bit careful as to what you can do, so you need to get permissions and things like that. But the concept of it is definitely there, though, isn't it?
It's going there and practicing, but taking the pressure off of yourself that you're there to compete. And sometimes if you go to like an unaffiliated show or something, it doesn't cost a lot of money, and they're not going to go on your record, or it's not, you know, use it as a training situation, because you've got people, you've got other horses, you've got other, you know, the staff walking around, you've got people calling out names, you've got the tannoy going, and that in itself can be quite, it's the atmosphere as well, and I think that's harder when it's things that we can't really see, but you can feel the buzz. And again, the horse will pick up on that as well, because you've got other horses going around that might be quite stressed, or might be quite you know, overstimulated in those environments. And when the horse is overstimulated with too many things going on, they might not necessarily be frightened of all these things, but it's too much information to take in, and they can't cope with that. So then you get a reactive horse, but it's not necessarily because they're petrified of everything. It's just too much going on. So break it down, pinpoint what it is that your horse isn't confident with at a show. And if it starts with being on the lorry, then you need to practice being on the lorry and standing still on the lorry. Can you actually leave your horse tied up with the ramp down and leave it there and it stands still, or does it bash the floor after 5 minutes? Well, that's what we need to work on. We need to teach you to be able to stand still and relax on the lorry, because if your horse isn't relaxed, you haven't even brought it out, tacked it up yet. So you're setting it up to have a bad day, basically. And I think some riders like having a more fiery, reactive horse, because when we're in a state of acute stress, so stress that lasts for like a couple of minutes, technically the body can perform better in some senses, and there's some research on show jumping which has proved this to some extent, but then on a mental level, then we have to ask, well, why is the horse stressed to begin with, and is it just excited and let's do stuff? That's kind of okay for me. But if it's stressed because actually this is too much for me, I'm quite like in a negative state of emotional stress, then yeah, we need to readdress that and make it feel better.
Okay, so just really quickly to ask you on that one. God, we could talk about this for hours, couldn't we? I think
we
might need to do a joint course.
We might need to do another one. Yes, definitely.
There's definitely so many parallels here. It's crazy.
Massively, yeah.
But let's talk about the idea of a horse being excited and stressed. And I know I keep talking about jumping, but I see a lot more of this stuff in jumping and dressage, just because of the acute stress levels for both.
Definitely.
It's slightly more dangerous, potentially. You've got to be going faster. Things happen quicker, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So let's look at a pony, for instance, or a horse. One of the misconceptions is that when they're really pulling and they're going for it, they go, oh, my pony loves it. And I often look and I think, that's not a pony that's loving it. That's a really, really stressed out pony. Like, you've had to bit it up like crazy. You can't actually stop it. You've got to pull it round the corners because it's not really listening. Like, how can we start to educate people on the difference between an excited horse and a stressed horse without the anthropomorphization as well, which is really difficult, which the technical term is anthropomorphization. I love the word. What if people are like, what are they on about? Never heard of that word. What would you say that is? I'm probably better off asking you today.
Okay, so it's basically putting human emotions and mindsets, feelings onto an animal that doesn't have the cognitive abilities to feel those or to experience those. So saying that the horse is guilty is completely scientifically incorrect, because they cannot experience the feeling or emotion or mindset of feeling guilty. Now that's just to say that science hasn't proven that, so we'll just put that out there for everyone, but this is the point of being evidence-based. We're using the evidence that science has taught us that this is how they think and feel, and so it's not to say that they can't feel jealousy, because jealousy has been proved in dogs, but it's only in very specific situations, and I did have someone say to me the other day, oh, my horse protects me from other horses in the field, and I was like, I don't think she is. I think she's protecting you as a resource, so she's technically resource guarding you from the other horses, and that was what's really going on. So there's always a more simple explanation for what's really happening. So when we say the horse is naughty, well, actually it's because it's in pain, or it's frightened, or it's just learnt. It was originally, and now it's learnt this behaviour. And like you say, when there's a trigger and there's a behaviour and there's a consequence, in behavioural science we call it the ABCs. So you've got kind of the thing that happens first, so the antecedent, if you like, of the behaviour, so the trigger for the behaviour. Then you've got the behaviour itself, and then you've got the consequence. So what does the animal get out of doing that behaviour? So even if you think, oh, well, the horse is rearing and going mad, well, what does the horse get? Well, actually, when it rears up, it gets a complete release in brain pressure, so there's no bit pressure anymore, and it's managing to avoid or begin its flight response from something that happened. And even if that is pain or a fearful stimulus that it's seen, in that split second, it worked for that horse. So it's just been rewarded for rearing, basically. And it's when we start to break that down, again, that helps owners realize what's really happening. And then when you can identify the trigger, well, now it's never going to happen again if you never encounter the trigger. But it's all about teaching the horse and rider to cope, to manage, to retrain the behaviors surrounding that trigger.
Cool. Okay, so how can we tell the difference then, if we take a pony that's show jumping, between one that's super excited and really wants to do it, and one that actually is running through the bridle, or is in a fear response, or has realised that stopping's not going to work? Or in fact, the other day I saw one, it was very interesting. It's clearly not very happy little pony. They've had to put it in its Dutch gag, because that's it's suddenly become really excited to be able to do it. But actually it refused to go in the school the other day. It just stood there and planted, and it was like, I'm having to bite my tongue, because I'm thinking, I know exactly why your pony won't go in the school, and I know exactly why it's now in a Dutch gag. Please don't tell me it's excited. It must be something else. So tell me why that might be.
And I think this is where when you know the subtle differences and you know what you're looking at in terms of body language, then a horse cannot lie. It just doesn't exist with them. They do not have the abilities to lie. So watching, if I see a lot of mouth evasions, I see discomfort in the face, I see tension in the face, the tail swishing a lot, a horse that's not as responsive to the rider's aids, or I see a rider applying lots of aids and the horse isn't responding to them. So it can work, kind of both ways. The horse isn't just listening, the rider might be pulling and the horse is just going forwards the whole time. Or saying, oh, turn this way, and it's just not doing it. So that highlights to me that it's not responsive to the training. So that's now gone out the window. I'm looking for indicators of stress, as in that negative emotional stress in the horse's face. And there are some very clear markers for that when you know what you're looking for. And I think it's very difficult because when you have got a physically stressed horse because they're doing something that's physically demanding, you're going to have some level of emotional stress that comes with it. So I always think of it like, well, if I was to run a race, I'm going to be, because you're like, well, again, this is the difference between humans and people. We've got a goal and we understand what we want at the end of this race, whereas the horse doesn't. And I think you've either got the horse, if the horse can be physically stressed but mentally okay. So there might be a tiny bit of emotional stress, but not necessarily anything that we would worry about, so to speak. But the horse that is negatively emotionally stressed will be showing that in their facial expression and in their body language when they go around the course. And the pony that runs flat out over everything, and I see this quite a lot on the Facebook videos that are advertising super show jumping ponies, and they're literally just bombing around this course with this small child flapping around behind them holding on for dear life, and that's worth a small fortune, this pony. But actually what I'm looking at is a very stressed out pony that's just learned to run over everything rather than use itself properly, rather than listen to the rider. There's no slowing down, it's literally point and go. And for some people that's what they want. Okay, that's fine. If that's what you want, then that's what you want. But if you put a nervous child on their back, and I think I've had this a lot, where parents have bought their child one of these ponies and then they get hold of it and think, oh my God, what have we done? This has been winning everything and now it's just a mess. Because you put it on a rider that's almost trying to do too much or isn't doing enough or is now scared of it because it's bombing them over every single jump. And now it's a question of, now we're unpicking this emotional mess from this little pony that has been put in bits that are too severe, when really you could have just retrained the responses properly. And I mean, I will say, talking about those sorts of bits, I think for some people and for some horses in some situations, then yes, having a bit that's got more of a lever action and then potentially applying more pressure, especially to the pole, is going to help you. But again, it all depends, because it's still negative reinforcement. So if your timing is correct and you're not actually using it as a positive punisher, then I think it's fine and it will help you, because sometimes hauling on a snaffle is going to be more painful and upsetting for a horse than just asking fractionally in a lever action bit. So you can be kinder in those bits, but it all depends on how you're using it. And if it's fitted correctly and suits the horse's mouth, and etc., etc. But yes, I think if you're watching a horse go round and it's performing well, it might be physically stressed, but it will not be showing any discomfort, any fear, any stress, as in the negative emotional stress in its face or its body. It will be relaxed to as much as relaxed can be when we're jumping around a 1 meter 20 or whatever. But it won't be, there won't be this tension in the face. Horses that are stressed tend to have a triangle eye, so you get the point above the eye. Any sort of oral behaviours, oral discomfort behaviours, tail swishing that's going around like a windmill, again, like bucking, all of those unwanted behaviours, if you see those, then that does indicate that a horse is struggling at some point with something.
Cool. Okay. And I think we're going to get you back on to talk about bitting and Lorinery and,
definitely.
Facial responses and comfort and some of the myths around bits and all this kind of thing. I think would be fabulous to help people out with that as well. Because, the thing about any of the tools and techniques that we use with animals, so kit or training that we use with humans, so mindset or physical stuff, any of that stuff, it's all about the context and the appropriateness and just understanding the effect that it's having. And whether that's what we want or not. there's no such
Definitely.
thing as a bad piece of, well, there might be a bad piece of kit, all right,
Yeah, there
something
are.
might be really horrendous. There are some bad pieces.
Yes,
But there's a lot of misunderstood pieces of kit, aren't there?
Mm.
And things like that. And especially when it comes to bits and bitting and understanding the effect of them and the comfort. And it could be the nicest, kindest thing ever, but if you've got a pair of hands that never release, or it's too tight, or it's pinching, it's not going to be a nice.
No, exactly. And I think if that piece of kit is uncomfortable, it's causing the horse pain. So just a really recent example, I went to see a horse who hunts. She was in a Waterford 3-ring gag, and I put her into a pelham, which was much more comfortable for her mouth. And because it's a fixed lever, then your aid is there, and then it's not as soon as you release. So you can be a lot more accurate with that sort of cheek piece than you can with a loose lever. And obviously getting rid of that Waterford mouthpiece for her made her so much more comfortable. She didn't open her mouth. She was much more responsive to the rider. So it's not one of those immediate quick fixes, but it now makes the horse more comfortable and responsive to your aids. And then now that's when your training comes into it and helps repair that on top of that. But even when we look at the gadgets that are out there and things like that, then okay, well, how does it make your horse feel using it? And the horse does not understand why you've put the Pessoa on. It doesn't understand why you've put the special head collar on, or the special training aid, or whatever you're using. It doesn't understand why you've got the carrot stick. It doesn't understand what the carrot stick is meant to be doing. So it's all up to you to teach your horse that's what we want. And I think the tools that get really difficult for horses to understand are the kind of the lunging aid tools, because we want them to start engaging this, that, and that muscle, but they have no idea. They don't know. And if we go and see a physio or something, then we know we're meant to be doing it like this and it's meant to feel like this, but we can't tell that to a horse. So shoving it in something that's really restrictive, immediately you now get a stress response to being in that piece of equipment. You've got mental tension, you've got that resistance going on a mental and physical level, because they might well be resisting the effect of the draw reins or the side reins that are too tight. So instead of, they might be going around looking pretty in their outline, but actually you're just building up a lot of this tension here and building up the wrong set of muscles. And I can always see a horse that's been ridden in draw reins, always. And even if they try and tell me that they haven't, I'm like, no, someone has. Someone's been doing it. So yeah, I think it comes down to behaviour and understanding how horses learn, and realizing that putting something on the horse, if you don't teach the horse what it is and how to respond to it, then it's never going to understand. So then what's the point of putting it on?
A really great prime example of that is a friend of mine has got a gorgeous pony, and it has never been taught what flexion is. And then someone was saying it needs more flexion, it needs to, and she's asking it, and it's stopping and it's backing up and it's doing, because actually it was never taught how to just flex its neck. As soon as it quietly in walk, it doesn't matter whether it was going forward or whatever, was taught that all I want you to do is that, and all I want you to do is that, and it went, oh, I can do that. But all the other time that it, it didn't understand it, it was getting frustrated and annoyed. Now it gets, hang on a minute, that's what it is. Now purely because there was a gap in the training. That's all there was. The person before never taught it. The trainer that they had never taught it. And now they're being told you need this. And they're like, Pony doesn't understand what that is. So he's showing me every other single reaction to it, because actually it doesn't know what I want it to do. So I think there's so many great examples, aren't there, of how it's just purely like shouting in French, isn't it? We do this a lot, don't we? Just shout louder in a foreign language and suddenly they're going to understand it. And we've got to, that's how I kind of think of it sometimes, is we've got to think,
definitely,
are we just shouting louder?
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, so we're definitely going to get you back on, I think, to talk about bits and bitting and comfort, more about that kind of stuff as well. If people want to get hold of you, I know there was a question that came up about lunging and spooking and things, but maybe they can ask that directly to you. I think we kind of answered it as well anyway, but it's very individual case as well, isn't it? I mean, some people, I get this a lot. People say, how can I deal with this? And it's like, well, actually, it depends on how you've got to the point you're at. There's not like a one size fits all. If it was that simple, we'd all just be doing it, wouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly. But I think if anyone wants to ask a question, they can either get in touch with me directly via my Facebook page, or if they comment under this video on your page, then I can jump in and answer some questions on there, and then everyone else can see the question and the answer, which might be quite helpful.
Yeah, that would definitely be quite helpful. So your Facebook page is Olivia Turner, Animal Behavioural Consultant and Bitting Specialist.
It's quite a long one, isn't it? Yeah,
I'll
I think
tag it.
it's if you do the at symbol and then Olivia Turner ABC, I shortened it, so that's a quick way to find me. I don't think there are many other Olivia Turner animal behaviour consultants out there, so it shouldn't be too difficult.
Super. So if they're listening in on the podcast and they want to get in touch with you, and your website
is www.oliviaturnерabc.co.uk.
Super. Great. So it's all about
Lovely.
the ABCs. That's brilliant.
There we go. It is, yeah.
Thank you so much for
Excellent.
everything, and everyone's saying thank you so much. You know, people saying this is brilliant. It makes so much sense. You know, and all that sort of thing. So, and
we'll set up a clinic.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to. I think it'd be really, nice. Really key to do that. So we will collaborate in the background, guys. Listen out for what we're going to be doing together. Then that would be great. And watch this space. So thank you so much, Olivia, and we'll catch you soon. Bye.